The entire room burst into laughter. A group of senior executives sat around the massive conference table inside one of America's most powerful cybersecurity companies. At the center of the room stood a young black intern girl, 19 years old, quiet, unknown, and completely out of place among billion-dollar executives. She had just interrupted the CEO's presentation, not because she was rude, because she had spotted something nobody else had, a security flaw. A tiny vulnerability hidden deep inside the company's newest defense system. The same system they were about to sell to the U.S. government for hundreds of millions of dollars. The CEO smirked, then laughed. "So you're telling me," he said, leaning back in his chair, "that after 5 years of development, dozens of engineers, and the best cybersecurity experts money can buy." He pointed at her. "The intern found a problem?" More laughter filled the room. The girl's face turned red. But she didn't back down. "It's there," she said quietly. The CEO shook his head, then decided to humiliate her. "Fine." He walked to the giant screen and crossed his arms. "Hack it." The room became silent. The executives exchanged amused looks. The CEO smiled. "Hack this system and I'll sign over my company." The room exploded with laughter again. Someone actually started clapping. Another executive pulled out his phone to record what he thought would be an embarrassing failure. The girl slowly sat down at a terminal. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. 30 seconds passed. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then suddenly, the main screen went black. The laughter stopped. A warning message appeared. "Unauthorized access detected." The room froze. Another screen flashed. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, every monitor in the building displayed the same message. Nobody was laughing anymore. The CEO's smile vanished. "What did you do?" he whispered. The girl looked up calmly. "I only used the vulnerability I warned you about." The room fell silent. But what happened next was even worse. Much worse. Because at 6:12 the next morning, before the CEO could even enter his office, his personal phone rang. The caller ID displayed only one word: Pentagon. His heart stopped. When he answered, the voice on the other end said something that turned his face completely white. "Mr. Reynolds." The voice paused. "We need to discuss your intern." The CEO swallowed hard. "What about her?" Another paused. Then the words that changed everything. "She's been on our radar for years." And suddenly the young black intern he mocked yesterday wasn't just an intern anymore. She was the secret everyone in the room should have been afraid of. And the Pentagon wanted her immediately. The laughter continued long after the screens went dark. Not because anyone still found the situation funny, but because nobody could quite believe what had just happened. Executives stared at the warning messages flashing across every monitor in the conference room. Engineers frantically checked their laptops. Managers exchanged nervous looks. And standing in the middle of it all was the young black intern girl who had warned them this would happen. Her name was Aliyah Carter. 19 years old, cybersecurity intern, no prestigious family connections, no expensive university degree, no executive title, just talent, the kind of talent most people ignored until it was too late. The CEO, Richard Reynolds, looked from the screens to Aliyah. His face had lost every trace of amusement. "What exactly did you do?" he demanded. Aliyah remained calm. "I proved the vulnerability exists. You hacked company systems." "No." She pointed toward the screen. "I exploited a flaw that already existed." The room became silent. Several senior engineers lowered their eyes, because they knew she was right. 20 minutes earlier, nobody had taken her seriously. The company had gathered for a final review of Sentinel Shield, their newest cybersecurity platform. The project had consumed 5 years and nearly $200 million. Government agencies were interested. Military contractors were interested. Investors were excited. Everything seemed perfect. Until Aliyah spoke. At first she hadn't planned to say anything. Interns weren't supposed to interrupt executives. Interns were supposed to observe, take notes, stay quiet. But she couldn't ignore what she found. 3 nights earlier she had discovered a weakness buried deep inside the system architecture. A dangerous weakness, one capable of giving unauthorized users access to critical infrastructure. She reported it immediately. Nobody responded. She emailed again. Nothing. She sent detailed documentation. Still nothing. By the time the board meeting began, She realized nobody intended to listen, so she spoke up, and the CEO mocked her in front of everyone. Now the same executives who laughed were staring at her like she'd become a different person. Richard Reynolds cleared his throat. Fix it. Aaliyah blinked. Excuse me? Fix whatever you just did. She folded her arms. It isn't my system. The CEO's jaw tightened. You're an employee, an intern, same thing. No. Aaliyah's voice remained steady. I warned everyone 4 times. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. One of them opened his laptop. A moment later, his expression changed. She's telling the truth. Richard looked at him. What? The emails. The executive swallowed. There were 4 of them. The room became even quieter, because now everyone knew exactly what had happened. A 19-year-old intern had identified a critical security flaw, and senior leadership ignored her. Later that evening, most employees went home, but not Aaliyah. She remained inside the building, working, studying, reviewing code, the way she always did. Cybersecurity wasn't just a job for her. It was an obsession, a puzzle she never stopped trying to solve. The office lights reflected off dozens of computer screens as she worked alone. Around midnight, her phone buzzed, a text message from her grandmother. Are you coming home tonight? Aaliyah smiled. Her grandmother worried constantly, especially after raising her alone. Soon, the reply came immediately. Don't work too hard. Aaliyah laughed softly. Too late for that. Most people at the company knew almost nothing about her. They saw a quiet intern, nothing more. They didn't know she had spent most of her childhood teaching herself programming from library computers. They didn't know she learned coding from free online courses because her family couldn't afford expensive classes. They didn't know she won regional cybersecurity competitions before turning 16, or that several universities offered scholarships after seeing her work. The people in that conference room only saw an intern. The Pentagon saw something else entirely. The next morning began like any other, at least for everyone except Richard Reynolds. The CEO barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those warning messages. He saw the executives laughing, then falling silent. Most of all, he saw Aaliyah proving him wrong. The memory irritated him, a lot. He entered his office at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, determined to move on. Then his phone rang. The caller ID displayed a single word, Pentagon. Immediately his stomach tightened. People at his level occasionally received government calls, but never directly from the Pentagon. Never at 6 in the morning, he answered. Richard Reynolds speaking. A calm voice responded. Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. The caller introduced himself. Deputy Director James Walker, Department of Defense. Richard sat down, suddenly very awake. How can I help you? The voice paused. Then came the question. Is Aaliyah Carter currently employed by your company? Richard frowned. What? Aaliyah Carter. The CEO's confusion deepened. Yes, she's an intern. Another paused. Then something unexpected happened. The government official laughed, not mockingly, almost knowingly. Not for long. Richard sat frozen. What does that mean? The answer changed everything. It means your intern is one of the most gifted cybersecurity minds we've encountered in years. Across town, Aaliyah had no idea this conversation was happening. She was riding the subway to work, headphones on, backpack beside her, completely unaware that powerful people were discussing her future. Passengers around her paid no attention. To them, she looked like any other college student heading to class. Nobody knew the Pentagon had tracked her achievements for years. Nobody knew several federal agencies had quietly monitored cybersecurity competitions she entered. Nobody knew her name appeared in reports circulated among government analysts, because talent like hers was rare, extremely rare. Back inside the Pentagon, Director Walker continued speaking. We've reviewed several of her competition records. Richard listened carefully. We've also examined independent security research linked to her online profiles. The CEO's eyes widened. Online profiles? Research? Who exactly was this intern? Walker continued. Frankly, Mr. Reynolds, we're surprised you haven't promoted her already. Richard said nothing, because yesterday he had publicly humiliated her. The irony was painful, very painful. Then came the statement he would never forget. If our analysts are correct, Walker said, Your intern may be one of the most talented young cybersecurity specialists in the country. Richard nearly dropped his coffee. 2 hours later, the entire company entered crisis mode. Because Pentagon representatives weren't merely asking questions. They were coming to meet Aaliyah personally. News spread quickly. Managers whispered. Engineers exchanged rumors. Executives suddenly remembered being polite to her. People who ignored her for months now smiled when she walked past. Aaliyah noticed immediately. Something was different. Very different. And when the CEO himself appeared at her workstation asking to speak privately, she knew something strange was happening. What she didn't know was that the Pentagon wasn't interested in hiring her. Not yet. They wanted something else. Something connected to a cybersecurity breach that had terrified government officials for nearly 3 years. A breach nobody had ever solved. Until now. And somehow, a 19-year-old black intern had just become the key to the entire mystery. Aaliyah Carter had no idea why the CEO suddenly wanted to speak with her. Yesterday, Richard Reynolds had laughed at her in front of an entire room of executives. Today, he was standing beside her desk looking unusually nervous. "Aaliyah," he said carefully, "could you come with me?" The entire office went quiet. Dozens of employees secretly watched. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Richard forced a smile. "We have guests." 5 minutes later, Aaliyah entered the executive conference room. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something was different. Very different. 3 men in dark suits sat at the table. No company logos, no employee badges, no introductions, just serious faces. The atmosphere felt more like a government briefing than a business meeting. Richard cleared his throat. "Aaliyah, these gentlemen are from Washington." One of the men stood. "Miss Carter, my name is James Walker." Aaliyah immediately recognized the name. Deputy Director, Department of Defense. For the first time all morning, she looked surprised. The man smiled. "Glad to see you've heard of us. Most cybersecurity researchers have." Walker nodded. "That's exactly why we're here." Everyone took their seats. The room became silent. Walker opened a black folder. Inside were several photographs and technical documents. He slid them across the table. Aaliyah looked down. Instantly, her expression changed. The documents showed network architecture diagrams, encrypted traffic patterns, attack timelines, government infrastructure reports. "This isn't public information," she said quietly. Walker exchanged a glance with the other officials. "No, it isn't." Aaliyah slowly looked up. "Then why are you showing it to me?" The answer shocked everyone in the room. "Because we think you've already seen something similar." Richard Reynolds frowned. "What exactly is going on?" Walker ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Aaliyah. 3 years earlier, a highly sophisticated cyber attack had penetrated multiple government systems. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been damaged. Instead, the attacker simply entered, looked around, and vanished. No fingerprints, no identity, no explanation. The breach became one of the biggest mysteries in modern cybersecurity. Hundreds of experts investigated. Nobody solved it. Until 6 months ago, when analysts discovered something strange, a pattern, a tiny clue hidden inside the attacker's code. A clue that matched research papers anonymously published online. Research papers written by a teenage cybersecurity genius, Aaliyah Carter. The conference room fell silent. Richard stared at her. "You wrote research papers?" Aaliyah shrugged. "Several." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" No one asked. Walker couldn't help smiling. The answer was exactly what he expected. Most geniuses loved attention. Aaliyah didn't. She cared about solving problems, nothing else. Walker pointed toward one of the diagrams. "Recognize this?" Aaliyah studied it for several moments. Then she nodded. "I've seen this technique before." Every government official immediately leaned forward. "Where?" Aaliyah pointed toward a section of encrypted routing pathways. "The architecture isn't unique." Walker blinked. "What do you mean?" "This wasn't designed by one person." The room froze. Aaliyah continued studying the documents. Her eyes moved rapidly across the pages. The more she looked, the more concerned she became. Finally, she pushed the papers away. "This isn't one hacker." Walker stared at her. "What? It's a group." The officials exchanged worried looks. Because that conclusion matched classified intelligence reports. Reports nobody outside government should have known existed. Yet Aaliyah reached the same answer in under 5 minutes. Richard Reynolds sat speechless. For the first time, he realized how badly he had underestimated her. Not just yesterday, for months, maybe longer. The intern he mocked wasn't simply talented. She operated on an entirely different level, a level most people couldn't even recognize. Walker folded his hands. Can you identify them? Aaliyah thought for a moment, then surprised everyone again. Maybe. The room became completely silent. Maybe? Walker repeated. Aaliyah nodded. If I can access the original datasets. One of the officials laughed softly. You think you can solve a 3-year investigation? Aaliyah looked directly at him. I think whoever did this made a mistake. The official stopped smiling. What mistake? Aaliyah pointed toward one of the documents. Right here. The room leaned in. This encryption sequence. Walker frowned. What about it? Most people focus on the code. Naturally. That's why they missed it. Aaliyah tapped the page. The real clue isn't in the code. The room fell silent again. It's in the timing. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Walker slowly smiled. Because she had just identified something government analysts discovered only weeks earlier. A detail hidden so deeply that almost everyone overlooked it. Yet Aaliyah found it almost immediately. At that moment, Walker became certain. The reports were right. The competition records were right. The analysts were right. This young black intern wasn't merely gifted. She was extraordinary. As the meeting ended, Walker handed her a business card. If you're willing to help us, we'll provide everything you need. Aaliyah looked at the card, then at the officials, then at Richard Reynolds. The CEO suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Because for the first time, the balance of power had completely shifted. Yesterday, he had treated her like she was insignificant. Today, some of the most powerful people in the country wanted her help. And tomorrow? Nobody knew. But one thing was becoming clear. The mystery Aaliyah was about to investigate was far bigger than anyone imagined. Because hidden somewhere inside those government files was a name connected to billions of dollars, international espionage, and a secret organization that had remained invisible for years. And Aaliyah Carter had just taken the first step toward exposing them. 3 days later, Aaliyah Carter found herself sitting inside one of the most secure facilities in Washington. The room contained no windows, no company logos, no distractions, only computer screens, government analysts, and mountains of classified data. Most people would have felt intimidated. Aaliyah felt curious, very curious, because the deeper she examined the mysterious cyber attack, the stranger it became. For nearly 12 hours, she reviewed logs, encrypted communications, and network records. The attackers' methods were brilliant, almost flawless. Every move had been carefully planned. Every trace had been erased. Every digital footprint had been hidden. Yet something continued bothering her. A small detail, a tiny inconsistency, the kind most people ignored. The kind Aaliyah never ignored. Finally, at 11:43 p.m., she stopped typing. Her eyes widened. I found it. The room instantly became silent. Government analysts rushed toward her workstation. James Walker stepped forward. What did you find? Aaliyah pointed at the screen. The attackers made the same mistake twice. Walker frowned. What mistake? They reused infrastructure. The analysts exchanged confused looks. Aaliyah zoomed in on a series of timestamps. Not the servers. She highlighted another section. The scheduling patterns. Walker leaned closer. Then his expression changed. Because he finally saw it. Every attack had been launched at nearly identical times. Not exact times, but predictable windows. The kind created by human routines, human habits, human behavior. The attackers had hidden their identities. But they couldn't completely hide who they were. Not from someone looking at the right clues. Aaliyah continued typing. More records appeared. Then more. Then more. Suddenly a pattern emerged. The attacks weren't coming from random locations around the world. They were connected. Connected to a private network used by dozens of shell companies. Companies that technically shouldn't have been connected at all. Yet somehow they were. Walker stared at the screen. What are we looking at? Aaliyah took a deep breath. A financial network. The room froze. The investigation had always focused on cybersecurity. But Aaliyah was seeing something different. Money. Huge amounts of money, moving through hidden channels, crossing international borders, passing through dozens of companies, then disappearing. One analyst shook his head. This can't be right. Aaliyah looked at him. It is. She opened another file. The screen filled with transactions. Millions, then billions. The room became completely silent. Walker slowly sat down because he understood exactly what this meant. The cyber attacks had never been the real objective. They were distractions, cover operations, designed to hide something much larger, something financial, something global. Hours later, investigators traced the network to a secret organization operating across several countries, an organization nobody had successfully identified before. For years they had remained invisible, untouchable. Now their protection was beginning to collapse, all because one 19-year-old intern noticed patterns everyone else missed. Walker stared at the evidence, then looked at Aaliyah. "Do you realize what you've done?" Aaliyah shrugged. "I followed the data." Walker laughed softly. To her, it was that simple. To everyone else, it was extraordinary. The following morning, news of the breakthrough reached the highest levels of government. Meetings were scheduled, reports were distributed. Security agencies launched coordinated investigations, and for the first time in years, officials finally had a path forward. But the story wasn't over, not even close, because hidden within the financial records was a single name, one name that appeared again and again. A name connected to powerful corporations, government contracts, and international influence. Whoever that person was, they weren't going to surrender quietly. And somewhere, as investigators closed in, that mysterious figure received a warning that their secrets were no longer safe. Because Aaliyah Carter had found the trail, and she was getting closer every hour. The warning came too late. By the time the mysterious organization realized Aaliyah Carter had uncovered their financial network, federal investigators were already moving. Accounts were frozen. Servers were seized. International agencies began coordinating raids across multiple countries. For years, the organization had hidden behind layers of shell companies and fake identities. Now those layers were falling apart, one by one. Inside a secure government operations center, James Walker stood beside a giant digital display showing the investigation's progress. Agents watched as new evidence appeared every hour. The network was larger than anyone imagined. Billions of dollars had moved through hidden channels, corrupt contracts, illegal payments, corporate espionage. Everything was connected. And at the center of it all was one man, Victor Lang, a billionaire businessman whose public image was spotless. For decades, he had presented himself as a respected entrepreneur and philanthropist. Behind the scenes, he had secretly controlled the entire operation. When agents arrived at his headquarters, they found overwhelming evidence, financial records, encrypted communications, secret accounts. The case was over. Victor Lang's empire collapsed almost overnight. Meanwhile, Aaliyah sat quietly inside the same secure facility where she had spent days analyzing data. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't seeking attention. She was simply reviewing reports, the same way she always did. Walker entered the room carrying a folder. "You know," he said, smiling, "most people would be enjoying the spotlight right now." Aaliyah looked up. "Most people aren't me." Walker laughed. That was certainly true. He placed the folder on her desk. Inside was an official letter. Aaliyah opened it. Her eyes widened. The letter contained an offer, a remarkable one, a fully funded cybersecurity research position working alongside some of the country's top experts, access to advanced technology, elite training, and the opportunity to help protect critical national systems. For a moment, Aaliyah simply stared at the page. "This is real?" she asked. Walker nodded. "Very real." Aaliyah looked down again. Years earlier, she had taught herself coding using library computers because her family couldn't afford anything else. Now some of the most powerful organizations in the country wanted her help. Life worked in strange ways. A week later, Richard Reynolds requested a private meeting. The CEO seemed very different from the man who had mocked her in front of an entire conference room. When Aaliyah entered his office, he stood immediately. "I owe you an apology." Aaliyah remained silent. Richard continued. "I judged you without understanding your abilities." He shook his head. "Actually, I didn't even try to understand." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Aaliyah smiled slightly. At least you figured it out eventually. Richard laughed. Fair enough. Several months later, Aaliyah stood on a stage receiving an award for her contributions to national cybersecurity. The audience rose to its feet. The applause lasted nearly a minute, but Aaliyah's eyes weren't focused on the crowd. They were focused on one person sitting in the front row, her grandmother, the woman who had believed in her long before anyone else did, the woman who sacrificed everything to give her a chance. Tears filled her grandmother's eyes as she smiled proudly. And in that moment, Aaliyah realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't exposing criminals, or solving impossible mysteries, or impressing powerful people. It was proving that talent, determination, and hard work could take someone further than anyone imagined, especially when the world underestimated them. And that was something no one would ever do again.